Coming up in today's newscast, the president of the Philippines begins his historic 3-day tour of Israel. An art gallery is evicted for hosting a group that's critical of the Israeli government. And after playing for Tel Aviv's soccer team for 10 years, an Argentinian player is now trying to win citizenship to the state of Israel. Yesterday marked the first ever visit by a Philippine leader to the state of Israel. President Rodrigo Duterte will spend the next several days meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, visiting the Holocaust Memorial, and signing a massive new oil deal. But the controversial leader has already set off a minor storm. Just mere hours after touching down, President Duterte addressed a room of Filipino foreign workers in Israel and publicly defended a rape joke that he made as freedom of speech. Duterte infamously made a speech on live television not long ago, saying that there would be many rape cases in one of his cities if there were many beautiful women in it. This apparent attempt at humor was met with bitter disgust both domestically and abroad. It's unclear why he felt the need to bring it up at all or defend it here in Israel. But these words come amidst growing concerns that Israeli leaders are continuing to embrace foreign presidents with disturbing histories of human rights violations and sometimes even anti-Semitism. For many, President Duterte is the sum of all those concerns in one. In 2016, he proudly compared himself to Adolf Hitler in his mission to exterminate drug dealers from the Philippines. Further to that, Duterte's police force have been accused of murdering upwards of thousands of innocent poor people in execution-style killings under the banner of a fake drug war. Despite these criticisms, Israeli leaders have welcomed Duterte to the country with open arms. In celebration of this visit, the Foreign Ministry announced the appointment of a new Israeli ambassador to the Philippines, Rafael Harpaz. While Prime Minister Netanyahu has indeed prioritized foreign trips in an effort to find support for the Jewish state abroad, the true bottom line here may be strictly business. Last year, the Philippines began investing major dollars in Israeli military technology. Duterte will spend his time here overseeing the finalization of an oil deal and will also likely be shopping for more Israeli-made weapons. In 1939, the Philippines was one of the few countries to host an open-door policy in an attempt to give Jews an escape from the Nazis. Today, more than 70 years later, Duterte's visit to the Holocaust Memorial in Israel will be seen by some as a beacon of hope and by others as a dark warning of things yet to come. As accusations of widespread anti-Semitism throughout the British Labour Party continue to emerge, alarming questions are also being raised. Former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown addressed a Jewish Labour conference this week, calling on all Labour members to stand in solidarity with the Jewish people and against racism in the party. It's about who we are, who we stand for, what makes us tick, and about the soul of the Labour Party, said Brown. But for some, it's far too little too late. Former Chief Rabbi in the UK, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, has called the apparent rise in anti-Semitism an existential threat, and he described how many European Jews are now feeling the pressures to leave. Well, joining us with more on this issue is political consultant Oliver Wirth and Dr. Natan Aridan of the Ben-Gurion Research Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism. Thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Oliver, let me start with you. Is there an existential threat against the Jews of Europe and the UK?
Well, I'd first of all say that Rabbi Sachs is one that Chief Rabbi Sachs has never been known as one to grandstand or make political statements for the sake of it.
Yeah, this is a first for him.
This is certainly very rare for him to say anything massively political. So when he comes out and says something of this nature, I think it's time to take notice. In terms of an existential threat, do I believe something major is going to happen tomorrow, in a week or a year? Probably not, and I certainly hope not. But we know that when the political establishment stops to show empathy to the Jewish community, it is the beginning of what can turn into something much more serious. And can that develop into an existential threat? Well, I think if Chief Rabbi Sachs has reason to believe so, I've got no reason to doubt that that's the case.
I would agree with most of the comments. The question here in terms of existential threat is that there have been more incidents of anti-Semitism which have been reported to the police over recent years. This is a very worrying effect. And originally, I think many of the Jewish community have managed to put this under the carpet. But with a massive demonstration when the Jewish community leaders turned out, that has never happened in British Jewry politics. This is a very serious situation in which I think the Labour leadership needs to deal with as quickly as possible.
Well, so, an argument that often comes up is maybe people are just more sensitive now than they were. And it's like, no, maybe now they're just more empowered to say something than they were in the past. So, which is it? Are we seeing a rise in anti-Semitism or a rise in the comfort of anti-Semites to come to the fore and the rise in the comfort level of the Jews to kind of come and say, hey, there's something really terribly wrong here?
I think with the social media and the influx over recent years, there are more outlets for anti-Semitism. But in preparing for this interview, I thought the most important thing is to explain that the thing about anti-Semitism is connected to Israel. Israel is considered to be a pariah state by Jeremy Corbyn. And to a large extent, Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state. This has given a tremendous influx to others who attack Israel and do so through the Jewish community. It is basically saying, and the most important thing is, Israel has no right to exist in its borders, even before 1967. The issue is not just the West Bank, which is important, it's also before 67, and this is pervasive. Just one other thing, when I was in Britain during the 7/7 bombings, the then Mayor Ken Livingstone understood why Islamic terrorists would attack, saying that they had lived in refugee camps, but these people had second, third generation from the subcontinent of Africa. And this, I think, explains the misunderstanding and the fact that one can be Jewish, be proud of being Jewish, and supporting the state of Israel. This is no longer considered legitimate.
Well, I mean, I agree mostly, though I think the centre of the debate is somewhat different in that, for me, the problem with Jeremy Corbyn is that quite uniquely, he doesn't allow the Jewish community to define for themselves what is victimization and what is anti-Semitism.
Well, and he wouldn't accept
That's right. Which is an internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism. Now, we can focus on whether it's because of Israel or this or that, but the reality is that Jeremy Corbyn would not dream of telling the black community what they should and should not consider to be racist, the Muslim community what is and what is not Islamophobic, or any other minority group when they have the right to feel afraid and victimized. That is uniquely held for the Jewish community. The Jewish community alone cannot decide for themselves when I feel afraid, when I feel victimized, when I'm concerned. He believes that's for Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to dictate when that is and is not acceptable.
So again, is that symptomatic of something more insidious and maybe under the radar, or is there something kind of bubbling up within the Labour Party that's kind of causing this?
Oh, there's something bubbling up. And I think that if there is one occasion, and Naz Shah, a Labour MP last year in Bradford, posted something anti-Semitic on Facebook, and then immediately after, a mea culpa apologised and worked hard afterwards on reforming and better understanding anti-Semitism. Jeremy Corbyn, we're not talking about an isolated incident. We are talking about laying wreaths on terrorist graves in Tunisia. We are talking about doubting whether British Zionists can understand British irony. We're talking about not taking seriously complaints of anti-Semitism within the party, punishing people that call him an anti-Semite, and now not adopting an internationally recognized definition of anti-Semitism. That in isolation, one event you can think maybe a misstep, maybe a mistake, but when you put these events together, that is anti-Semitism.
All right, so, again, Dr. Aridan, I want to come back to you. Where do we go from here? What do we do with this? What is the Labour Party, capable of doing if it were willing to take the steps to rid themselves of this kind of notion that they are anti-Semitic and maybe to downplay the anti-Semitic attitudes in the UK?
First of all, within the next couple of days, we'll learn about it. But I think the most tragic thing is whatever the outcome is, it'll be bad for Anglo Jewry. The reason is, A, if they decide to adopt all the principles adopted by the 31 countries on anti-Semitism, then this will be seen as Jewish Zionist pressure. If they fail to do this, then the Labour Party continues to be seen as anti-Semitic and the issue still remains. This is, for Anglo Jewry, whatever the outcome, is going to be very problematic. But let me say, when I was head of the Israel Society at Leeds University, following the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist resolution, in the morning I was organizing demonstrations with the Labour Party, which I was active in, for helping Asians against anti-fascists. When I got onto the university in the evening, we were banned from having any activities because, being pro-Israel, we were Zionists and racists. This thing has been an undercurrent throughout the party for many years, as in other parties.
So it's not new, like former Prime Minister Brown is
suggesting. No, but other
suggesting.
leaders have stamped it out. Jeremy Corbyn has not stamped it out. He has not been unequivocal, and this is the major problem that the Labour Party has, which has always been a tolerant party.
But are other parties facing the same issue, and are those leaders stamping it out, or are we not seeing that same, anti-Semitism in
there
the
are
other
very
parties?
There are very important forces of anti-Semitism, but what's important, unique to the Labour Party, is the unions. This is not the same as in the Conservative Party, and year after year there are resolutions against Israel about being racist, about being apartheid. This doesn't happen in other parties.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we have to end it here. But thank you both, gentlemen, for coming in and talking with us about this.
Thank you.
Oliver Wirth, Dr. Aridan, thank you so much. All right. Now, following President Trump's decision to halt all funding to the Palestinians' chief UN refugee agency, the White House has apparently floated another contentious idea. Trump officials reportedly asked Jordan and Palestinian leaders to consider creating a joint Palestinian-Jordanian confederation, essentially absorbing the West Bank into Jordan. The idea was immediately shot down by both sides. This idea has been at least discussed as possible peace plans since the 1980s, but never truly pitched until now. Jordanian leaders see the absorption of millions of Palestinians, most of whom exist in a state of poverty, as a logistical and existential impossibility. On top of this, both Palestinian and Jordanian officials say that this idea unfairly removes Israel's responsibility from the matter, especially with no clear path to Israeli-Palestinian peace or borders in place. But Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has just suggested a different possibility. During a visit with Israeli peace activists, Abbas told the room that he would be willing to consider such a confederation if it was a trio that included Israel as well. This is the first major time Abbas has suggested any kind of alternative to a two-state solution. Abbas apparently pitched this idea to Trump's Middle East envoy during their trip to the region last year. But given the Trump administration's recent freezing of all funds to UNRWA, Palestinians are now skeptical that Trump is seeking a peaceful solution to the conflict to begin with. In a rare move, the PA has just dispatched an intelligence team to Washington, D.C. in an effort to understand what else the United States may have in store for the Palestinians. Aside from freezing all funds to UNRWA, the United States does currently send aid money to keep Israeli-Palestinian security measures in place. This is one of the rare places where Israelis and Palestinians actually cooperate on a regular basis. If those systems were to collapse as well, both sides recognize that the danger to both Israelis and Palestinians would likely spike. A highly controversial and recently made court decision now holds major implications. Last year, a small art gallery in Jerusalem hosted a series of events and lectures merging politics and art. Some of those events included discussions with Breaking the Silence, an NGO deeply critical of Israel's policy in the Palestinian territories. Well, in response, the Jerusalem municipality moved last year to evict the art gallery once and for all. And now, after a long court battle, a verdict has just been announced. TV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the story.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. So the gallery here we're talking about is the Barbour Gallery in Jerusalem. It's very well known. That gallery's been running for a little over a decade now, I think 13 years. And among its regular exhibits from both local and international artists, Barbour is, like you said, a place known for encouraging a political dialogue through art. So for that reason, this gallery has long been a target of the government for a couple of years at least. Last year, for example, the gallery wanted to host a talk for both Israeli and Palestinian parents who lost relatives due in any parts of the conflict. And the Jerusalem municipality tried to block that event in court from happening, but ultimately they were unsuccessful. But that brings us to this latest decision. So the courts have now just decided that the gallery will in fact be shut down and totally evicted entirely. Needless to say, that's opened up quite a debate concerning the relationships of art, freedom of speech, and even just property rights, I gotta say.
Right, so that's the thing. When the judge made this decision, how much does politics factor into it? Because again, as I understand it, these are just talks and discussions and art events that Barbour was hosting, right? So whatever you feel or don't feel about Breaking the Silence, at the end of the day, these aren't rallies for terrorism or calls to violence. These are discussions.
Yeah, so the judge addressed this exactly in his verdict. After ruling that the gallery would be evicted, He noted that, yes, the city's motives behind this were purely for their own politics. It was totally political. Now, typically, this would be a reason why the judge would rule not to evict an artistic institution. That's freedom of expression right there. But in this case, the judge made its decision more on property law and on the rights of the municipality to make decisions regardless of notice, which in and of itself is quite its own legal statement on its own.
All right, so that is interesting because, again, on the one hand, Israel has clearly put NGOs like Breaking the Silence in the crosshairs. Earlier this year, for example, the Knesset made it illegal for Breaking the Silence to even enter schools. But that leads me to the other end of this argument, which is that in a healthy democracy, citizens do have the right for a public discourse.
Sure, if it's safe and
right,
fair. And
even on public property. And so what better place to have that discourse than in an art gallery? But the government solution here is to evict the institution altogether. So where does that leave us?
Well, logistically at this point, the true fate of Barbour is going to fall with whoever is elected mayor of Jerusalem. There's an election coming up, a big one. So most likely it's going to be a mayor who does agree with this court decision and goes ahead and, goes along with the eviction of the gallery. But yeah, this was an interesting court case because for most of the audience at that trial, most of the defendants, most everyone at that trial, they were Israel's artistic community. I mean, many of whom also don't agree, by the way, with Breaking the Silence or what they say, what they do, but they do agree that in Jerusalem, of all places, people should be able to express their opinions, whatever those opinions may be, as long as it's safe, as long as it's not rallying for violence. So, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult line to walk.
It certainly is. All right. Thank you for your report, Brett.
Of course.
West Nile virus continues its deadly outbreak in Israel. The disease has claimed its third victim, a 61-year-old Israeli man, and this follows two other victims as well, both elderly men. Now, while West Nile virus is statistically not usually fatal, the disease has no current vaccine. And as we're seeing here, symptoms can quickly become deadly if left unchecked for too long. West Nile is, of course, the virus spread typically by birds and mosquitoes. And that's why Israeli medical teams have tried to contain the disease near the source of the suspected outbreak in central and northern Israeli sectors close to the coast where mosquitoes proliferate. Officials in the health ministry have told the public that the situation is under control. But with 14 patients in critical condition and nearly 70 cases total reported, numbers have spiked tremendously over last year. In somewhat related news, officials have just closed a body of water in the Golan Heights over suspicions that the water is infected with E. coli, a bacterial strain linked to a string of diseases and viruses. While not E. coli develops into diseases, the bacterium can cause very intense food poisoning and is often found as a source of food contaminants. Now, this is all unrelated, by the way, to this month's outbreak of leptospiriosis in Golan waters, an infection that can turn very deadly if left unchecked. While Israeli water sources are dwindling after 6 consecutive years of drought, the last thing the country needs are contaminated rivers and streams. So let's hope this situation gets flushed out soon and fast. Former sitcom star Roseanne Barr hit ratings gold earlier this year with the reboot of her classic television series Roseanne. But the reboot was canceled following racist tweets that Barr made regarding a former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, which also triggered ABC to give Roseanne the axe. Well, now the Connor family may be moving on without Roseanne in a new reboot of the reboot set for next month. In the meantime, Roseanne says that she's coming to study in Israel and might actually end up moving here permanently. During a podcast with Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, Roseanne says that she's holding no grudges against the new iteration of her original series, which is called The Connors, but she's also not exactly sending it her best wishes either. Barr was fired by ABC from the Roseanne reboot following Barr's remarks comparing Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett to if the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby. After the blowback, Roseanne quickly apologized, only to somewhat waffle back on that apology a few days later. Fellow Roseanne star John Goodman confirmed recently that the new spin-off series, The Connors, will begin by killing off Roseanne's character and removing her from the story. Clearly, it's all given Roseanne a bit to think about. The Jewish American now says she's planning on coming to Israel to study with some teachers, and then may consider moving here full-time as well. The Roseanne reboot drew both massive ratings and divisive reviews. Roseanne herself is a proud proponent of the United States President Donald Trump, who actually called Roseanne personally following the successful debut of her reboot. Her support of President Trump colored the scripts for the Roseanne reboot, and The Connors will have its series premiere on ABC on October 16th. All the other series regulars are set to reprise their original roles. All right, according to doctors, you are supposed to drink something like 2 liters of water every day. And I'll be honest with you, I'm probably as guilty as the next guy when it comes to not drinking nearly that much. It's a simple thing, and yet for whatever reason, millions of people suffer from dehydration just because they forget to drink water. Well, have no fear, an incredible Israeli solution is here. Check it out. A couple of years ago, the head of what would become the Israeli company Waterio was hit with some tough news. His teenage daughter was suffering from strange symptoms that doctors just couldn't crack. Well, it took a while, but soon enough they realized that the problem was pretty simple. She just wasn't drinking enough water. Well, that got Yoav Hoshen thinking, how can I make sure this problem never happens again, and not just for my daughter, but for everyone? That was 2015, and this is now. Waterio has just released a patented smart cap for all kinds of bottles that monitors your intake and reminds you when it's time to grab a gulp. An enhanced IoT sensor is built into the base of the cap, which can screw onto most conventional water bottles. A computer chip monitors the user's drinking and either buzzes or beeps with a reminder for when it's time to take another sip. Most insane of all, the caps themselves are good for nearly a year, can be linked through the cloud, and even trigger other reminders like taking your medicine or refilling your soap. But this first version of the reminder cap is already being tested out by water companies in Israel, as well as one in Australia and New Zealand. Companies are absorbing all the costs into their own packaging, meaning a bottle of water with a smart cap costs you the same as a bottle without. And after the reminder cap is tested out, the connected version of the cap will integrate apps and personal user details to create a customized water diagnosis. The rumor is that future versions will even integrate weather conditions into its algorithms and adapt to heat or cold to how much water you need to drink. I think by now it goes without saying that for any problem, no matter how big or small, some genius Israeli invention is just around the corner to solve it. In the sports world, it's very common for players to be bought and transferred to different countries, and that's the way it works. For this reason, some players end up living abroad for many years and often even find themselves starting a family in a foreign country. At least this is the case for an Argentinian soccer player that after playing in Israel for 10 years could now be deported. And it's all because the club he was playing for decided to cancel his contract. ILTV's Latin American correspondent, Joy Gavijon, is here with more on the story. So, who is this player? What's going to happen?
Thanks, Aaron. So the player we're talking about is Argentinian Pedro Galvan. Now, as you said, he's been living here in Israel and playing for local teams for more than 10 years already. But he's not Jewish, which makes the citizenship process to stay in Israel way more difficult.
All right, but I can imagine that, after being here for this long, he probably feels like an Israeli in a way already.
Yeah, well, yes, he says that he loves Israel and he wants to stay here. Actually, his career here in the Holy Land really stands out. He has the record for being the top foreign scorer with 104 goals in 257 matches. Wow. And he played for Bnei Yehuda, Maccabi Petach Tikva, Hapoel Ashkelon, Hapoel Marmorek, Hapoel Tel Aviv, and the list.
Let's go on. All right, so he's built quite a career here, and even after all that, he could face deportation because Hapoel Tel Aviv just decided to cancel his contract,
exactly.
Just like that. So what are the chances that he could stay?
Well, look, he expressed his intention to stay, and he's not alone in this because Israel's culture and sports minister, Miri Regev, is actually helping him. She said that she personally approached Interior Minister Aryeh Deri to ask him to grant citizenship to Galvan for all his contributions to soccer in Israel, and this is what's giving Galvan a little bit more hope, at least.
All right, but again, though, just to clarify, why is he so interested in staying in the first place? I understand being here for this long, you get comfortable.
Yes,
but what's wrong with Argentina or whatever other country he may end up playing for next?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the other places, but you have to take in fact that his 3 daughters were born here and raised here, and they speak better Hebrew than Spanish, according to him. And he's also a strong supporter of Israel. He even spoke up for Israel when the match between Argentina and Israel was in doubt. He asked the Argentinian players to come, and he even told the press, I want to quote him, he said, "There is no safer place than Israel. If I said that here it's heaven, you will think that I'm exaggerating." So he clearly loves it here, and he wants to be a part.
All right, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what the final decision from Aryeh Deri is. But I'm sure many fans here are already considering him an Israeli no matter what happens.
I'm sure.
Anyway, thanks for the update, Joy.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, and now for our Hebrew word of the day. With record hot months and a 6-year drought, it's easy to get dehydrated. And that's why today's word is dehydrated or meyubash. If a person is meyubash or dehydrated, then they need to drink water. When the garden is too meyubash or dried, you may need to replace some of the plants. And when your fruit is meyubash or dehydrated, then eat it, because it's delicious, and so on in that fashion. So remember, keep your water nearby. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be mostly clear and warm with lows of 78 or 26 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect sunny skies and little change in temperatures. The high should be around 89 or 32 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.61 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.